Amanda Hayes sat on the edge of her worn-out couch, staring at the pile of unpaid bills spread across the coffee table. The electricity bill was overdue, her landlord had given her a final warning about the rent, and her 5-year-old son, Jake, needed new shoes for school. She ran a hand through her chestnut brown hair, exhaling shakily. Life had been a relentless storm ever since her ex-husband walked out on them 2 years ago. The cafe where she worked barely paid enough to keep food on the table. No matter how hard she tried, it felt like she was drowning, gasping for air, in a world that never seemed to notice her struggle. That morning she had left Jake with her neighbor, promising to return with something special, a promise she had no idea how to keep. The thought of disappointing her son again twisted her stomach into knots. She needed a miracle, and that miracle came in the most unexpected form. Amanda hurried down the busy Manhattan streets, the chill in the air biting through her thin jacket. She wasn't supposed to be here, outside the towering glass headquarters of Holt Enterprises, one of the most powerful corporations in the country. The company's billionaire CEO, Richard Holt, was a legend, widely admired but shrouded in mystery. He was 69 years old, rarely seen in public, and had built an empire from nothing. Her presence here was pure desperation. She had applied for a secretary position weeks ago, hoping for a miracle but never heard back. Today she was determined to speak with someone, anyone, who could give her a chance. Just as she reached the building's entrance, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up. The back door opened, and out stepped a man who commanded attention despite his age. Richard Holt. Amanda had seen pictures of him in business magazines, but in person, he was even more intimidating. Tall, well-dressed, and exuding an air of quiet authority, he glanced around before his sharp blue eyes landed on her. For a brief second, time seemed to freeze. Then, to her utter shock, he walked straight toward her. "You look like you're about to beg for something," he observed, his voice deep and unreadable. "Tell me, what is it?" Amanda's heart pounded. She wasn't prepared for this. I was hoping for a job," she stammered. "Anything, really. I just need a chance." Richard studied her with a piercing gaze. A single mother struggling to make ends meet, he guessed. Her face burned with embarrassment, but she nodded. For a moment he said nothing. Then, in a tone so casual it almost felt absurd, he said, "Marry me." Amanda blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said marry me," he repeated, as if discussing a business deal. "For 5 days." She stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. "This is some kind of joke, right?" "No joke," he assured her. "I need a wife, temporarily, and you need money." Amanda was frozen, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Why would a billionaire CEO need a wife for 5 days? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "That's not important right now, but if you say yes, I can promise financial security for you and your son." She should have walked away. Every logical part of her screamed, "This is insane." But another part, the part that had spent too many nights crying over bills and hungry stomachs, whispered, "What if this is real?" Richard pulled out a sleek black business card and placed it in her trembling hands. "Think about it, but don't take too long. I don't like to wait." And with that, he disappeared into the building, leaving Amanda breathless, bewildered, and clutching a proposal that could change her life forever. Amanda spent the entire night staring at that business card. Every fiber of her being told her this was too good to be true. Why would a billionaire want to marry someone like her, a broke, exhausted single mum? The logical thing to do was to tear up the card and forget about it. But then she thought of Jake, sleeping peacefully in the next room. She thought of eviction notices, unpaid electricity bills, and the sheer exhaustion of fighting a losing battle every day. By morning, her mind was made up. She dialed the number. Within the hour, she was seated in an opulent penthouse office, facing Richard Holt once again. "You've made your decision," he said, more of a statement than a question. Amanda took a shaky breath. "Yes, but I need to understand why." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. "I don't owe you an explanation," he said simply, "but since you're about to become my wife, I'll give you this much. I need a temporary bride for personal reasons. You, on the other hand, need financial security. It's a fair exchange." Amanda hesitated. "What happens after 5 days?" "You'll walk away with $500,000. Her breath caught in her throat. $500,000. It was more money than she could ever dream of, enough to give Jake a stable future. But there are conditions, Richard continued. You must act like a real wife. Publicly, we'll be a loving couple. You'll move into my home, attend events with me, and follow my lead. His eyes locked onto hers. Can you do that? Amanda swallowed hard. Could she really pretend to be in love with a man she had just met? Could she pull this off? For Jake, she had to. Yes, she whispered. Richard stood. Then we have a deal. 2 days later, Amanda found herself in an elegant white dress, standing in front of a justice of the peace. The wedding was small, private. Just Richard, Amanda, and a lawyer. There was no romance, no vows of love, just signatures on a piece of paper that made her Mrs. Amanda Holt. As they walked out of the courthouse, Richard turned to her. You'll move into my home tonight. I'll have someone pick up your belongings. His home was a mansion, the kind Amanda had only seen in movies, marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and luxury at every turn. But the most unexpected part, a room prepared for Jake, filled with toys, books, and everything a 5-year-old could dream of. Amanda's heart clenched. You did this for my son? Richard's expression was unreadable. A child should never suffer for the mistakes of adults, he said simply. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as cold as he seemed. That night, Amanda lay awake in the massive king-sized bed. She and Richard had separate rooms, and yet the reality of what she had done hit her like a ton of bricks. She was married to a billionaire for 5 days. Just as she was drifting off, she heard a noise outside her room. Footsteps. Curious, she slipped out of bed and followed the sound down the hall. Richard's study door was slightly ajar. She peeked inside and froze. There on his desk was a medical report. Her heart pounded as she read the words. Richard Holt, stage 4 cancer, terminal. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. This marriage wasn't about business. It wasn't about money. He was dying, and she had no idea what that meant for her, or for the next 5 days. Amanda took a step back, her heart hammering inside her chest. The medical report sat on Richard's desk, its words blazing in her mind like fire. Stage 8 cancer, terminal. She had married a dying man. A whirlwind of emotions crashed over her. Confusion, fear, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief. This wasn't just a business transaction. This wasn't about power or money. It was something far more complicated, something she wasn't prepared for. Her fingers trembled as she carefully placed the report back in its exact position. If he found out she had seen it, what would he say? What would he do? But before she could slip away, a voice sliced through the silence. Do you always wander around people's offices at night? Amanda froze. Slowly she turned around. Her breath caught in her throat. Richard stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. The dim light of the room cast shadows across his sharp features, making his blue eyes seem even colder. He wasn't angry, not yet, but he was watching her, studying her. Amanda's mind raced for an excuse. Lie. Say something. Anything. I couldn't sleep, she said, forcing her voice to stay steady. I heard a noise and you thought my office was the perfect place to investigate. His words held no real accusation, but the weight of them made her feel exposed. Amanda swallowed hard. I got lost. This house is bigger than I expected. Richard held her gaze for a long moment. Then, as if deciding not to press further, he stepped inside. You'll get used to it. He walked past her, straight to his desk. Amanda watched as he picked up a crystal decanter and poured himself a glass of dark amber liquid. Can't sleep? He asked, his voice calmer now. No. There's a library downstairs if you like to read, or a movie room, or you could walk around all night, sneaking into places you shouldn't be. Was that a hint of amusement in his voice? Amanda forced a small smile, though her heart was still racing. I'll stick to the library. Richard took a slow sip of his drink, his gaze never leaving her. Then, without another word, he turned away, dismissing her completely. Amanda took the hint. She left, her thoughts a tangled mess. She should feel relieved that he hadn't caught her snooping, but deep down she knew. This marriage was not what she thought it was, and she had no idea what she had just walked into. The next morning, Amanda woke up feeling restless. Sunlight streamed through the enormous windows, illuminating the luxurious bedroom she still wasn't used to. For a long moment, she just lay there, staring at the ceiling. The events of the night before replayed in her head. The medical report, Richard's piercing gaze, the way he had so easily let her go. She had so many questions, but most of all she wondered, Why hadn't he told her the truth? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Mrs. Holt?" a woman's voice called. Amanda hesitated. She still wasn't used to that name. "Come in." The door opened and a well-dressed woman entered, holding a tablet in her hands. She had a professional air about her, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "My name is Claire. I'm Mr. Holt's assistant. He asked me to inform you that you'll be accompanying him to a charity gala tonight." Amanda blinked. "A gala?" "Yes, ma'am. The car will pick you up at 7 p.m. Mr. Holt has also arranged for a stylist to assist you in getting ready." Amanda barely had time to process this before Claire was already making her way out of the room. "Wait," Amanda called. "What exactly does he expect me to do at this event?" Claire gave a small, unreadable smile. "Just smile and act like his loving wife." And with that, she was gone. That evening, Amanda stood in front of a full-length mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back at her didn't feel real. Her long chestnut hair had been styled into soft waves, cascading over her shoulders. The deep blue silk gown hugged her figure perfectly, its elegant neckline adding an air of sophistication she didn't recognize in herself. The diamond earrings sparkled under the light, and her makeup, subtle yet flawless, made her look effortlessly glamorous. She barely recognized herself. "You clean up well?" Amanda turned to see Richard standing in the doorway, dressed in a classic black tuxedo. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. There was something about him tonight, something different. He carried himself with the same confidence, but in this setting, with the soft glow of the chandeliers reflecting off his sharp features, he looked younger. He looked like a man who had lived 1,000 lives. Amanda quickly pulled herself together. "You don't look too bad yourself," she said. Richard smirked. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and for a split second, she hesitated. But then she reminded herself, this was part of the deal. She took his arm and together they stepped into a world she never belonged to. The gala was breathtaking, held in an opulent ballroom with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and violin music floating through the air. The event was the very definition of wealth and power. Everywhere Amanda looked, men in tailored suits and women in dazzling gowns clinked champagne glasses, laughing as if their lives were perfect. She felt out of place immediately. But Richard, he fit in effortlessly. As they entered, dozens of eyes turned to them. Whispers started. Amanda could hear them, people questioning who she was, why Richard Holt, the reclusive billionaire, had suddenly appeared with a young unknown wife on his arm. She stiffened, but Richard leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Relax. Just smile and let them think whatever they want." His voice was smooth, reassuring. So she did. She smiled. And she played the part. But as the night went on, Amanda realized something strange. Richard wasn't acting like a man who wanted attention. He was keeping a careful distance from certain people, avoiding direct conversations. It was subtle, but she noticed. And then something even stranger happened. Halfway through the night, a tall, distinguished-looking man approached them. He had silver hair and a polished demeanor, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "Richard," the man greeted with a fake smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." Richard's expression didn't change. "Senator Whitmore," he said coolly. Amanda instantly recognized the name. Senator James Whitmore, one of the most powerful politicians in the country. There was tension between the two men, thick enough to cut. "And this must be your wife," Whitmore continued, turning his attention to Amanda. Richard placed a firm hand on the small of her back, his grip just a little too tight. "Yes, this is Amanda." The senator extended a hand, and Amanda took it, forcing a polite smile. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Holt," he said smoothly. There was something in his eyes that sent a chill down her spine. Richard must have felt it too, because he quickly ended the conversation. "If you'll excuse us, we have other guests to greet." Without another word, he guided Amanda away. Once they were out of earshot, Amanda whispered, "What was that about?" Richard didn't answer, but his jaw was tight. His grip on her waist was tense, and for the first time, Amanda realized this marriage wasn't just about his illness. There was something else going on, something bigger, and she had just been thrown right in the middle of it. Amanda could still feel Richard's firm grip on her waist as they walked away from Senator Whitmore. The tension in his body was undeniable, a stark contrast to the poised, controlled demeanor he usually carried. Something about that man had shaken him. As they weaved through the glittering ballroom, Amanda kept glancing at Richard, waiting for him to say something, anything that would explain what had just happened. But he didn't. Instead, he plastered on a cool smile and continued playing the role of the untouchable billionaire. By the time they reached a quieter corner near the bar, Amanda couldn't hold back anymore. "Richard," she murmured, keeping her voice low. "What was that about?" He took a slow sip of his whiskey, eyes scanning the crowd. "Drop it." His tone was final, but Amanda wasn't the type to let things go so easily. "No, I won't," she pushed, keeping her expression composed so no one would suspect their conversation. "You looked like you wanted to strangle that man." Richard exhaled sharply, setting his glass down with controlled precision. "Senator Whitmore and I have history," he admitted, still avoiding her gaze. "And not the good kind." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "What kind of history?" Richard finally turned to her, his blue eyes darker than usual. "The dangerous kind." Before she could press further, a woman in an emerald green dress approached, a bright smile on her face. "Richard, it's been too long." Amanda watched as Richard's entire posture shifted. The tension evaporated, replaced with his usual charming mask. "Olivia," he greeted smoothly. The woman's gaze flickered to Amanda, curiosity flashing across her face. "And this must be the new Mrs. Holt," Olivia said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Olivia Vaughan. Richard and I go way back." Amanda shook her hand, forcing a polite smile. "Nice to meet you." Richard wrapped an arm around Amanda's waist, pulling her closer. A silent message. "Olivia is one of the best corporate attorneys in New York," he said. "We've worked together on a few deals." Amanda nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more beneath Olivia's carefully measured smile. "Well, I hope we'll see more of you, Amanda," Olivia said. "You're quite the mystery woman." With that, she walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Amanda turned to Richard, narrowing her eyes. "You have a lot of people in this room who seem very interested in our marriage." Richard smirked, taking another sip of his drink. "Comes with the territory." Amanda wasn't convinced, and as the night continued, that uneasy feeling in her stomach only grew stronger. Back at the mansion, Amanda slipped off her heels the moment they stepped inside. "My feet are killing me," she muttered, stretching her toes against the cold marble floor. Richard chuckled, loosening his tie. "You handled yourself well tonight." She glanced at him. "I felt like a zoo animal on display." "Welcome to my world," he said dryly. Amanda hesitated before speaking again. "Richard, about the senator—" "Drop it, Amanda." There was an edge to his voice now, sharper than before. She crossed her arms. "I'm your wife. Don't you think I deserve to know what I just walked into?" Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he would ignore her. But then he ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair and sighed. "Whitmore and we have unfinished business." Amanda's stomach twisted. "What kind of business?" Richard met her gaze. "The kind that can get people killed." A chill ran down her spine. She wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but something about his expression warned her not to. For now, she would let it go. But she knew this wasn't over. The following afternoon, Amanda found herself walking through the mansion's grand hallway when she heard raised voices coming from Richard's study. She wasn't one to eavesdrop, but something about the tone in Richard's voice made her pause. "I don't care what he wants," Richard snapped. "He doesn't control me." A second voice responded, lower, more controlled. "He's not someone you can just ignore, Richard. You know that." Amanda frowned. Who are they talking about? She peeked through the slightly open door and saw Richard standing by his desk, his posture rigid. Across from him stood an older man in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. "I'll handle it," Richard said firmly. The man exhaled, shaking his head. "I hope you know what you're doing." With that, he turned and exited the room. Amanda quickly stepped back, pretending to admire a painting as the man walked past her without a second glance. A few seconds later, Richard emerged from the study, his eyes immediately locking onto her. "You were listening," he said flatly. Amanda lifted her chin. "You're not exactly subtle when you're yelling." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "I don't have time for this." "Make time, Richard." She was done being kept in the dark. After a long pause, Richard finally spoke. "There's someone who wants something from me. Someone powerful." Amanda's pulse quickened. "Whitmore." Richard hesitated, then nodded. "He's not just a senator, he has connections, dangerous ones." Amanda's mind raced. "And what does he want from you?" Richard's expression darkened. "Something I won't give him." Amanda swallowed hard. She had agreed to 5 days of marriage for financial security, but she was starting to realize she might have stepped into something far more dangerous than she ever imagined. That night, Amanda couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with unanswered questions. What did Whitmore want? Why was Richard so adamant about keeping her out of it? And more importantly, was she in danger? She had nearly drifted off when a noise startled her, a sharp thud from downstairs. Her heart pounded. She sat up, straining to hear. Another noise, this time closer. Someone was in the house. She slipped out of bed, tiptoeing toward the door. Slowly, she peeked into the hallway. The mansion was dark and silent. But then, footsteps. Amanda's breath caught. She turned, hurrying toward Richard's room. She didn't care if he got mad. If someone had broken in, he needed to know. She reached his door and knocked urgently. No answer. Her stomach twisted. She pushed the door open and froze. Richard's bed was empty, and the balcony door was slightly ajar, the curtains billowing from the night breeze. Amanda's heart slammed against her ribs. Where was he? And more importantly, who else was in the house? She took a shaky step backward, her mind racing. Then, a hand clamped over her mouth. Amanda screamed, but it was muffled. A strong arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back. Panic surged through her, but then, "Amanda, it's me." The voice was urgent, but familiar. "Richard." She spun around, gasping. What the hell is going on? Richard pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to be quiet. Then, in a low, deadly whisper, he said, "Someone's here." Amanda's blood turned to ice. Richard grabbed her hand and pulled her into the shadows of the room. They stood in silence, listening. Then, the sound of a door creaking open downstairs. Amanda's breath came in quick, shallow bursts. Richard's grip tightened on her hand. "Stay close to me," he murmured. And as the footsteps grew louder, Amanda realized, whatever she had gotten herself into, there was no turning back now. Amanda's pulse pounded in her ears as she clung to Richard's arm. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the darkened mansion. Whoever had entered wasn't in a hurry. They were searching. Richard's grip on her hand was firm, grounding her in the moment. "We need to move," he whispered. Amanda swallowed hard, nodding. Richard led her through the shadows, his movements careful and precise. They slipped out of the room and down a side hallway, avoiding the main staircase where the intruder had entered. As they reached a hidden door near the back of the house, Richard paused, listening. Then a voice rang out. "Holt! I know you're in here." Amanda stiffened. The voice was deep, calm, too calm. Richard's jaw tightened. He turned to Amanda, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Stay here." Amanda's eyes widened. "Are you insane? You're not going down there alone." But Richard was already moving. "Lock the door behind me," he ordered. Amanda wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. He wasn't just protecting her, he was preparing for something dangerous. With one last glance, he disappeared into the shadows. Amanda shut the door, locking it with shaking fingers. Then she pressed her ear against the wood, her heart hammering. She heard Richard's footsteps as he moved downstairs. Then a tense silence, followed by a voice. "You've been avoiding me, Holt." Amanda clenched her fists. "Whitmore." She could barely make out Richard's response. His voice was low, steady. "You're trespassing." Whitmore let out a slow chuckle. "Oh, please. We both know you have bigger problems than me being in your house." Amanda's blood ran cold. Whitmore knew. He knew Richard was dying, and he was here to use it against him. "You've got months left, if that," Whitmore continued. "Why not make this easy on yourself?" Amanda held her breath, waiting for Richard's answer. Silence stretched between them. Then Richard spoke. "Get out of my house." Whitmore sighed. "Fine, but this isn't over." His footsteps echoed as he moved toward the front door. Amanda backed away, her heart pounding. A moment later, she heard the front door shut. Silence. Then Richard's footsteps returning. She unlocked the door just as he appeared at the top of the stairs. "He's gone," he said. But Amanda knew better. This wasn't over. The next morning, Amanda found Richard sitting in his study, staring out the window. "Are you going to tell me the truth now?" she asked, stepping inside. Richard didn't turn around. "You already know?" Amanda swallowed hard. "How long?" A pause, then 3 months. Maybe less. The weight of his words settled over her. She walked closer, her chest tight. Why didn't you tell me? Richard finally turned to face her. Because you wouldn't have agreed to this. Amanda felt a lump form in her throat. He was right. If she had known the truth from the beginning, she would have said no. And yet, standing here now, she couldn't imagine walking away. She took a deep breath. What does Whitmore want from you? Richard hesitated, then exhaled. Power. He wants control over my company, over my legacy, and he thinks I'm weak enough to give it to him. Amanda's stomach twisted. And are you? Richard's gaze sharpened. I don't break that easily. Amanda nodded, a sense of determination settling in her chest. Then neither do I. Richard studied her for a moment. Then, for the first time, he smiled. A real smile. And Amanda knew she wasn't leaving. Not now. Days passed. Then something happened that neither of them expected. Richard's condition worsened. It started with exhaustion, then dizziness, then a near collapse in his study. Amanda caught him before he hit the floor, panic surging through her. You need a doctor, she said, gripping his arms. Richard shook his head. No hospitals. But Amanda wasn't listening. She called his private physician, and within an hour, a doctor arrived at the mansion. As the exam went on, Amanda stood at Richard's side, her fingers lightly brushing his. She wasn't sure when she had started caring this much, but now, the thought of losing him was unbearable. After the doctor left, Richard sat on the edge of his bed, looking exhausted. Amanda knelt in front of him. You're not alone in this, Richard. He looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then, to her shock, he reached up and cupped her face. I know. And then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was real. And Amanda kissed him back. That night, everything changed. They were no longer strangers tied by a contract. They were something else. Something neither of them could explain. As they lay together, Amanda traced a hand over Richard's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. You know this wasn't part of the deal, she whispered. Richard chuckled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. No, but I don't regret it. Neither did she. And for the first time since this marriage began, Amanda wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about him, about them. But their peace didn't last. The next day, Whitmore returned. This time, he wasn't alone. Amanda and Richard were having breakfast when the butler entered. Sir, Senator Whitmore is here to see you. Richard's expression darkened. I told him to stay away. He insists. Richard sighed, pushing back his chair. Fine. Amanda stood. I'm coming with you. Richard hesitated, then nodded. Together they entered the main hall. Whitmore stood there, flanked by two men in dark suits. Richard, he greeted smoothly. We need to talk. Richard's jaw clenched. I have nothing to say to you, Whitmore smirked. That's a shame, because I have something to say to you. Amanda could feel the tension crackling in the air. We both know how this ends, Holt, Whitmore continued. You're running out of time. Do you really want to spend your final days fighting a battle you can't win? Amanda stepped forward, her voice steady. He's not alone. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Amanda met his gaze. Yes. Whitmore studied her, then laughed. You've got fire, I'll give you that. Then his expression turned serious. But fire can be dangerous. Richard stepped in front of Amanda. Leave. Now. Whitmore smiled. See you soon, Holt. Then he turned and walked away. Amanda exhaled. Richard reached for her hand, squeezing it. Are you sure you want to be in this fight? Amanda looked up at him. I'm sure. Richard smiled. Then let's win it. Weeks passed. And then, against all odds, Richard's condition improved. The doctors were stunned. The treatments were working better than expected. He wasn't out of danger, but he had more time. And with that time, he made a choice. He fought. Against Whitmore. Against the odds. And Amanda? She fought with him. Not because of the money, not because of the deal, but because she had fallen in love with the man she never expected to care for. And when Richard Holt finally defeated his enemies and secured his legacy, he turned to Amanda and said, Stay. And she did. Because this time it wasn't about survival. It was about love.